on the AF and one on the neg can alternate asking each other questions. And basically in PF, the team that speaks first gets to ask the first question. In the camp tournament, since we have set sides, the AF will always get the first question. After that, the AF can keep asking, or the neg can stop the AF and ask their own question as well. And basically in Crossfire, you're alternating between asking and answering questions. So Crossfire is extremely important. Like I mentioned before, it's not only a speech and shows the judge how trustworthy you are, but it's also a good time for you to be able to take apart your opponent's case and clarify misunderstandings so that you can make your own position stronger in future speeches. Before we get into the details of Crossfire, I just want to mention cross-examination or cross-ex. This is a form of Crossfire that's used in Lincoln Douglas and policy debate, where instead of both sides asking each other questions, after each speech, for the first 4 speeches in policy and for the first 2 speeches in Lincoln Douglas, I think, only the team that didn't just speak asks a question. For example, after the AF gives their constructive in policy, the neg will give a cross-examination where only the neg asks the AF and the AF is forced to answer every question but can't ask questions back, and then vice versa after the neg constructive. We're not doing this for this camp, but just keep it in mind if that's a form of debate that you might want to do in the future. Okay, give me a sec. I'm having some tech issues. I just need to bring something. Okay. Yeah. So when you're talking about Crossfire, you have to make sure this is the most utilized form of your debate because it's the only time you get to directly interact with your opponents. So under strategy, the first thing you want to do is poke hole in their arguments. If you notice that there's parts of their speech or their cards that are weak or that don't support their arguments, you want to ask them about it in a way where they can either concede that there's something wrong or they can answer it in a way where you can get more information about where the weak points of their speech are so you can focus on it in your future places. So this is where you notice that there's logical issues with your opponent's case or where things don't add up, and you want to target these weak points in your opponent's case in order to take it apart, since if you're looking at a case, it's sort of in a line where you need every piece to fall in place before their case makes sense, and if you could take apart their case at one crucial point, you can potentially take out their entire case. Crossfire is the best time for you to do this because you get to directly interact with your opponent, and if what you're doing is correct and your opponent doesn't know how to answer it, you're also showing the judge that your opponent doesn't know what they're doing. Another thing that you want to focus on is arguing, not asking. So basically, the main point of this is to focus on making argumentative questions. When you ask a question, you have to focus on attacking your opponent instead of just asking them to clarify. So you want to ask questions where they're forced into a corner and have to answer the way you want them to answer, instead of them being able to ramble on about their case and making the judge think that they're smarter than you. So for example, I guess in the H-1B topic, if your opponent's reading a case that said H-1B workers benefit your opponent's economy, if you're going to ask a question, it's going to be like, how do H-1B workers benefit the economy? And then your opponent gets to talk about their case for the next 3 minutes and you'll be sad. Instead, you want to have an argument embedded in your question and you want to put your own case into it. So the way you'd ask this question, for example, would be more like, given that H-1B workers are paid cheaper than American workers and displace American jobs, how can H-1B workers benefit the economy if they're causing layoffs in America? And that way, your judge knows that their argument is, there's a caveat to their argument that they're taking away jobs, while at the same time you expand your own argument while taking away from their argument. And this is the way you want to ask questions. And when you're asking questions, the one thing you want to do is have ethos. You have to be confident and you want to sound like you know what you're doing. And judges will watch you and say, hey, they know more about their opponent's case than their opponents do. And then, you know, if you know more than your opponents, at least perceptually, then judges will tend to give you higher speaker points or put your arguments in higher priority. One of the most important things you want to do is look at the judge and keep consistent eye contact because the judge thinks you're speaking to them. One of the biggest mistakes people make in Cross-Ex and Crossfire is looking at their opponents, but the judge doesn't think you're engaged when you're doing that. So when you're in an actual room and an actual like physical debate tournament, maybe not on Zoom, you want to maintain constant eye contact with the judge so the judge knows you're conveying information to them and your point gets as seeming more confident. Another thing you want to focus on is the power dynamic between you and your opponents. Oftentimes, one side seems too dominating. If you're confident and you're doing things correctly, things should be good, but one thing you want to watch out for is being too confident, too aggressive. So one of the main problems with seeming confident is that sometimes you can come off as rude. If you're constantly asking your opponents questions without giving your opponent time to respond or giving them time to ask their own questions, then the judge might think that you're controlling the cross-sects too much and you may be being rude or disrespectful to your opponent, and they can actually dock your speaker points. Additionally, some parent judges or lay judges or judges who are less experienced can just think you're a bad person and just vote you down and give you terrible speaks. Speaking from experience, I know that it's good to try to be aggressive to get your point through, to seem confident, but there's a limit to this and you have to watch out sometimes. There's no slide on this, but I just want to briefly talk about answering Crossfire. If your opponent asks an open-ended question and they're asking, not arguing, then try to take as much time as possible explaining your case. This is why it's important to know your case and your arguments well, because if you're able to talk on and on about things, then not only will your judge be able to know your case better and vote on it more easily, but you're also showing the judge perceptual dominance where you seem like you know your case better than your opponents. Yeah, that's about it.